Welcome to another episode of the Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. My guest today is Gabriel Gaarden with another segment of Making Sense with Gabriel. We'll be right back. Hi, Gabriel. Welcome back to Making Sense with Gabriel. You are the star.
Thanks, Nancy. Great to be here.
Hey, can we talk a little bit about how, I go to the grocery store and I'm trying to look for a sweetener that is more natural and healthier. However, I think that I'm being duped because I see beet sugar and I see all these things, use agave and use this is healthier. But can you talk about that, about how we get duped sometimes when we're thinking that we're getting healthier, but really it's just more like advertisement and promotion by those companies?
Yeah, so I think that's something for everybody to consider when it comes to food. Food, first and foremost, in a capitalist system is an industry, and it's an industry that has to make money to survive, so to speak. And so when the bottom line really is the key driver to what products we see on the aisles in the store, what products we see advertised on television or on Facebook or Instagram or whatever it might be, there's big money behind all those things. And the end point or the goal is to make money. It's not to, make the public more healthy, right? That's not what the food industry exists for. It doesn't exist to keep people healthy or to help people achieve health if they're already dealing with obesity, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, cancer, whatever it might be. The food industry is there to survive as an industry and to grow in terms of their bottom line. That being said, yeah, people should always keep that in mind, right? They're not advertising to me to make me healthier. They're advertising their product because they want to sell it, period. And so, yeah, people should know. Again, people, if they've ever heard me before, I harp on whole plant foods, whole food, plant-based, because those are the foods that have been proven in scientific trial after trial and large studies, small studies alike, throughout hundreds and hundreds, really thousands of studies show that when we eat more of these whole plant foods, more beans, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, which are a fungus separate from plants, but we'll throw them in there with plants because they promote our health in the same way that those other forms of plants do, nuts and seeds and herbs and spices. When we consume more of these whole and minimally processed forms of plant foods, we improve our health. But when we choose fractionated or highly processed, what we call ultra processed foods and or animal products on a regular basis, those things tend to do the opposite. They don't promote our health, but they promote illness. They promote disease. And sweeteners fall in that category of processed, ultra processed foods. And it doesn't matter if it's agave or if it's 100%, pure maple syrup, or if it's 100% organic raw cane sugar, as opposed to like white sugar, which is even more highly processed, or whatever it might be. If it's one of those highly processed fractionated sweeteners, right? We're processing the syrup that comes from a maple tree, and we have to cook it and cook it and cook it, and we cook off all the extra water, and it concentrates all the sugars down into this very sweet syrup, which again, at the end of the day, it's just a sweetener. It's just sugar. And yes, it has a few more nutrients in it than does white sugar. And so I would recommend, use maple syrup instead of white sugar, or use unbleached, raw, 100%, organic sugar instead of your more, highly processed forms of sugar. But at the end of the day, those things are more similar than they are health promoting, right? So maple syrup and agave and these other forms of sweeteners are much closer to sugar than they are to the health promoting side of the spectrum with whole plant foods. And so there's nothing wrong with eating these sweeteners on occasion, but I would tell people beware. When appropriate, try to use a date for a sweetener. Chop up some dates and add them to your oatmeal rather than just pouring a ton of maple syrup or adding several tablespoons of sugar to your oatmeal in the morning. And if you need, or use them in combination, right? Especially if you're somebody with a sweet tooth who's used a lot of sugar in the past and you say, dates just don't do it for me, right? They're just not that same sweet flavor that I really crave. Well, then I recommend it would behoove you to kind of titrate down off of those highly concentrated sweeteners over time and use more of those whole plant foods to sweeten your foods instead of the sugars and the maple syrups and things like that. Nothing wrong with using a little bit of this, but try to use them in tandem. So chop up a few dates to add sweetness, or chop up a banana on your oatmeal in the morning to add some sweetness. And if that's not quite doing it for that sweet tooth that you're craving, then maybe add 1 or 2 tablespoons of maple syrup instead of 4 tablespoons of maple syrup to that oatmeal, right? And then over time, your body's going to get used to it, because something happens in our mouths and in our brains. It's called neuroadaptation, where if we start using less salt in our food, if we start using less sugar in our food, our taste buds are going to adapt. And then over time, what seemed like less salt or seemed so bland, if we just do that over a few times over the course of a few weeks, our bodies will adapt, and then we will no longer have the craving for so much salt or so much sugar or so much extra fat in our food to still enjoy it. But you got to give yourself time. So keep practicing. Don't give up. And like I say, nothing wrong with having a little bit of sugar on things, or a little bit of agave, or whatever it might be, that stevia, whatever people want to use. But at the end of the day, like I say, don't be fooled. Those things are still highly processed. They're nothing compared to the benefits that you'll get from eating whole plant foods. And you can even use date sugar, right? Date sugar is another kind of an in-between thing. They use whole dates, they grind them up. And so with whole dates, you're still getting all those other beneficial nutrients that you don't get in like sugar, because all the fiber and everything else has been removed. With date sugar, they just dry out whole dates and then they grind them up so that it's basically a sugar. And yes, it's got a slightly different flavor than like your highly processed sugar would, but your taste buds will adapt. Give it some time, or do a half and half. Use a little bit of sugar in a recipe and use a little bit of date sugar, because date sugar is much healthier than just sugar, and use a little bit of each, right? If date sugar straight up just isn't doing it for the flavor that you're trying to achieve in a recipe. Date syrup is another thing. They're using whole dates. I think they basically just, cook them, like boil them, get them soft, blend them up into like a syrup, but it comes from a whole date. And so you're not losing the fiber. You're not losing all those beneficial things that you lose if you're just eating like a processed or another form of sugar that's losing the fiber and all those other good things. So I hope that gives people some good tips for how they can occasionally use some sugar, use a little bit. Don't be fooled by marketing, because all those sweeteners are more similar than they are different, right? They're mostly just processed. They're not health promoting, right? We should be eating less of them and more of our whole plant foods whenever possible.
Well, I'm glad you talked about that, because, I go to the store and I see monk fruit sugar sweetener, beet sugar. And just recently, actually, I came across date syrup. So I got some of that, because I use it for my sopapillas. And but it's like, some people think that because it says beet, or because it says, coconut sugar or something like that, that it's healthier, and maybe slightly. But again, I think that we need to be aware and not be fooled that, we need to make better choices, like the date sugar or the date syrup, like you said.
Yeah, or just whole dates when possible, right? And again, the dose is what makes the poison. Most of us have heard that in regards to who knows what, but it certainly applies to nutrition too. And so if you need a little bit of sweetener in your coffee in the morning, there's nothing wrong with using a little squirt of stevia, or a little squirt of, whatever, some kind of a liquid sweetener that people might use, or just a little teaspoon of sugar or something. If that's how you drink your coffee, if it's only like one or 2 cups and you use a little bit, that's not the end of the world, right? We don't need to nitpick the little things. It's if we're drinking multiple sodas a day, and sodas have like 12 or 14 or 15 or more teaspoons of sugar in one soda. So compare 1 teaspoon of sugar in your morning coffee to drinking like 12 to 15 teaspoons of sugar in one soda. That's drastically different. And so don't worry so much if you're adding a little bit of sugar to your diet here and there. Just beware, because if you're not paying attention, little bits here and there can add up, right? But adding a little bit here and there isn't a huge problem. We don't need to nitpick or feel like people need to feel guilty about those kinds of things. It's watching out for the highly processed foods like drinking sodas, which have those huge amounts of hidden sweeteners, or eating large amounts of cookies and pastries and other highly processed things that are going to have loads of added sugar in them. that's when people really need to watch out. But if you're just adding a little bit of sweetener here and there to some coffee, to a smoothie, to, whatever it might be, that's really not the end of the world. Again, concentrate on whole plant foods. If you add a little sweetener to make sure you stay tried and true to your whole food plant-based diet, double thumbs up, right? There's nothing wrong with adding a little bit of salt, oil or sugar, right? Salt, oil, and sugar aren't healthy. But if you're adding a little bit of salt, oil, and sugar to your whole food plant-based diet to keep you tried and true and keep you on course, I'm all for it.
Thank you, Gabriel. Again, see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you for watching another episode of The Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. Remember, like us on Facebook, check out our website, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. Live vegan.